Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Of course, it takes a release of a DC film for me to come back to this channel after a while away, but let's get into it. Let's rank the entire DCEU. Is that what everybody's calling it still? Anyway, let's talk about Black Adam, but before we do so, please hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel for continued content from here. We're going to talk about a lot of pop culture stuff here in the future. My schedule has settled down, so we are going to talk about more stuff. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Later this week, I will be posting a horror movies tier list to wrap up October. And then at the end of the week as well, towards Halloween, I'll be ranking the entire Halloween franchise. So stay tuned for those rankings. So for those of you who haven't seen some of my other rankings, I've reiterated many times, DC is my thing. DC comics are one of my favorite pieces of fantasy, my favorite worlds to live in. I am a huge fan of DC Comics, so I will be coming at these films from a bit of that angle. Starting with the first film, Man of Steel. I think Man of Steel is a really, really good film. Obviously, everybody talks about him killing General Zod at the end, which is a decision that I think, doesn't necessarily work for the character, but it's something I can get over because I feel like the filmmaking in Man of Steel is actually quite good. There's some incredible shots. The way Zack Snyder is able to capture the fight choreography of Superman's never felt more powerful than he does in Man of Steel. That being said, it has plenty of flaws. There are quite a few character inconsistencies. Obviously, like I said, with Superman, Lois Lane isn't my favorite version of Lois Lane, but for the DCEU, it is one of the better movies. Henry Cavill's performance is really good. Please give him the proper respect he's due and give him a sequel. So, of course, because of the mixed nature of this film, it is a tough one to rank, but when we rank things on a tier list, they are subject to the rest of the franchise. And while I don't think there are that many great movies in the DCEU, I think Man of Steel is definitely in the top 2 or 3 of this whole franchise. I'm actually going to stick it in the A of DCEU. So continuing with the release order, again, that brings us to Batman vs. Superman, which was the next film in the franchise 3 years later. Batman vs. Superman is a very strange one. It's a film that tries to rely on the audience's general knowledge of our characters without actually building any characterizations for them in the first place. Thought the justifications for why they're fighting is pretty weak. Superman's made absolutely no sense until the Ultimate Edition. I think Gal Gadot's introduction to Wonder Woman is pretty good. Ben Affleck as Batman, this is by far his best film. Henry Cavill is good as Superman, but is given some really, really weak material. And the decision to kill off Superman at the end of this movie made absolutely no sense, considering it was the second movie in this entire franchise. Doomsday, pretty mediocre. I absolutely did not like Jesse Eisenberg's version of Lex Luthor. Still, though, with BVS, I think I'm going to give it a C. Batman warehouse scene is great, one of the best Batman action scenes ever. But there's very few things that I think I can say are really, really exceptional. It's just a lot of story in a little package. And even though the 3-hour version helps it, you shouldn't have to make your superhero movies 3 hours to convey your point. Later that year in 2016, we got Suicide Squad, which was always a really weird movie to have your third in the entire franchise be. This was a movie that tried to introduce ancillary characters in the vein of a Guardians of the Galaxy. It was cut and recut and recut until David Ayer was basically out of the project and a trailer company was cutting this movie. Some people really like Suicide Squad. I am not one of them. I think this movie is a disaster. I don't think it works really on any level. The characterizations are poor of almost every character save Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, which is one of the shining lights of this entire series. Jared Leto's Joker, we don't need to talk about. I've talked about it in my Batman villain rankings. Really terrible. I do not like Jared Leto's Joker at all. Amanda Waller, actually, another highlight, another thing that's one of the only consistent things throughout this whole series. So for Suicide Squad, I'm going to rate it in the F tier. I think it's one of the absolute worst DCEU movies ever made. So next is 2017's Wonder Woman, which at the time received incredibly glowing reviews. And I think it's a really solid superhero movie. To me, it doesn't do anything exceptionally well. There are some really solid scenes. The No Man's Land sequence, everybody talks about it. It gets the character, and I think that is the thing it does the best. Gal Gadot's version of Wonder Woman is solidly true to who she is. There are plenty of things I would personally do a little differently, but I think she plays the character and the role adequately. And I think the whole Themyscira stuff, that all works. Wonder Woman was definitely an overhyped movie when it came out, but I think people's overall reception of it has leveled out to what I think is a pretty acceptable rating for it. I would put it in the B tier. I think it's a solid movie, a movie that is fun to rewatch, with a mess of a third act and is way too long, like most of these movies are. So next we've got a very controversial film, one that is said to be directed by Zack Snyder, but was pretty much only directed by Joss Whedon, rewritten, reshot many times, one of the most expensive films ever made, Justice League. Justice League, as you can see, is my favorite superhero team, one of my favorite properties of all time. I absolutely love the Justice League. Everything from the entirety of all of the runs. I've read pretty much all of them. I love Morrison's run. I love Wade's run. And I especially love the Justice League animated shows from the early 2000s. This movie was one of the most disappointing experiences of my entire life. It's an absolute mess. I like none of the characterizations of any of these characters. I guess Wonder Woman is fine, but she barely does anything in the whole movie. Aquaman, not a fan of Aquaman in this movie. I think Momoa improved for his film. Ezra Miller's Flash is an absolute disaster, and I'm really not looking forward to the Flash film. Ben Affleck's Batman is awful in this movie. The amount of jokes and one-liners they try to give Batman is really embarrassing. And Batman could actually be one of your funniest characters, but what you need to do is use him as a straight man to play off of the humor of the other characters. And then we've got Superman, who I think is actually more true to the character than he really has ever been in the end. His goofy, cheesy entrance is actually, to me, quite in line with who Superman is. And if Suicide Squad might be the worst film in this series, Justice League is by far, to me, the most disappointing. I'm putting it in F. So then we move into December 2018 with James Wan's Aquaman film starring Jason Momoa and his first standalone movie. I think a lot of things in Aquaman work. They've got a pretty fun vibe to it, and you have to embrace kind of the goofiness of the character and that whole side to it. Visually, I thought a lot of this film was quite impressive. I thought they utilized the fantastical elements of Atlantis quite well. And I think they did a good job realizing the entirety of his little universe. I thought Ocean Master was a really solid villain. Still, I think I'm going to put Aquaman in C tier. It is on the upper side of C tier. I think it is a much better made film than Batman versus Superman, a lot more cohesive, but I think it has a lot of room for improvement and could do a lot of things a lot better. Next, we've got Shazam, and Shazam was one of the bigger surprises for me. The fact that they got this character right. I think Zachary Levi was an inspired casting choice, really nails that giddiness of being a superhero when you are a child, given not just powers, but an adult body, the ability to take on some of the greatest evils out there. I thought this movie works really well. It is simple. It doesn't do anything that's out of the ordinary and doesn't really do too many things that we haven't seen before in other properties, i.e. Marvel films or even some other DC films. That being said, I love this character. I've always loved Captain Marvel / Shazam. I think this vibe definitely hits more of the Jeff Johns reiteration of Shazam, but I really like that version of Shazam. I want to see a more serious Captain Marvel here maybe in the future, but I think that's part of his arc. I think as Billy grows up with the rest of his family, as everyone grows up and faces more real problems, I think we'll see that maturity in him as he starts to face more and more adult problems as the superhero. So when it comes to Shazam, I'm going to put it up in the A tier of DC. It has solid direction. It has a decent villain. It is what it is. It doesn't try to bite off more than it can chew. It tells a fun story, and I think it nails all the aspects of what it's trying to do. So now we move on to Birds of Prey, or the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. This movie was kind of a critical darling when it came out. It got pretty well received reviews, pretty positive for the most part, especially compared to when most of its other DC contemporaries. And when I saw it, I was pretty disappointed by it. I thought it was a pretty bland comedy. I think cramming the Birds of Prey in this movie was a really bad idea, both for them and for Harley. If we could really just focus on Harley, gotten in her head, you could have made a movie with violence, with fun, and with that Harley Quinn humor that we've come to love so much, whether it's in the comics or in the animated show. But Margot Robbie is magnetic as Harley Quinn. She's fantastic. She was perfect casting. She's one of the greatest casting choices ever for a superhero character or comic book character. But when it comes to Harley Quinn or Birds of Prey or whatever you want to call it, I think it's a pretty mixed bag. I don't think it does anything that's super memorable. Still, I'd put BVS higher, and I drop this in the C tier. I think it is just a forgettable average movie. So later in 2020, we got the HBO Max direct to video Wonder Woman 84. Honestly, Wonder Woman 84's plot is a mess. Again, movie way too long. You need to cut out some things. Why Cheetah and Maxwell Lord and all these characters are in this movie, I do not know. Cheetah felt like an afterthought, like a character you needed to throw in because she's Wonder Woman's most iconic villain, but had nothing to do with the Maxwell Lord plot. The whole wishing stone thing was ridiculous. I thought it was a dumb plot point. And these actors are trying. And as an 80s like homage, I think a lot of the movie nails that kind of vibe, but the bringing back Chris Pine, all of it was just pretty nonsensical. I there's not really anything about this movie that I loved or think, oh man, there's this one redeeming scene that was great. If I was going to rank Wonder Woman 84, which I am, putting it in D. So now we get into what most people would consider one of their favorite DCEU films, a petition for so long to see the Snyder Cut, which I was definitely intrigued by because of the way Zack Snyder exited the film. It couldn't have gotten any worse. So I was looking forward to a better cut of Justice League. And I think as a novelty, the Snyder Cut is pretty good. It's a movie that is at least cohesive, but it's a 4.5 hour movie. And again, when you're making your movie, why would you plot it to be 4.5 hours? Why is the cohesive, sensible cut of your film 4.5 hours? You know that's never going to be released. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why, and that still kind of grinds my gears. But at least Snyder's version of Justice League is tonally consistent with the first two films in his little trilogy. I did enjoy seeing a bit more of the fourth world apocalypse, and all of that stuff was something I was very excited for. It really makes me sad because I feel like we're never going to see Darkseid, outside of the end of this movie. And I really do, but I also don't want to at the same time because I feel like with the absolute randomness of this franchise's direction, I don't know what version of Darkseid I'm going to get. And the thing that saddens me is a lot of times when you make these half-assed products or you make these movies that are just kind of obligatory or trying because they have the incredibly difficult position of having very successful franchises like Aquaman or Wonder Woman financially, even if critically they're a little mixed. But then at the same time, your biggest characters, your Batmans, your Supermans, in terms of your Ben Affleck and your Henry Cavill Superman franchises that are tied to this universe, haven't really done anything. And so we're trying to bring back Michael Keaton. We're trying to do all these things. Start over. Start over. I don't really want to see Darkseid in this version of the DCEU. I think as much as this movie is a huge improvement, I think there's a lot of things that just left me disappointed because I know we're never going to see good versions of that. And we probably, to be honest, we probably wouldn't have seen a good version of this if Snyder had kept going, if this universe had kept going. I don't think it would have been that good. I think it was rushed. I think all of it was just kind of cobbled together. There wasn't the emotional stakes there that we needed. There wasn't the effort and the time put in place to crafting something. It was a lot of catch up. If we're just judging the Snyderverse, sorry for my rant about the DC universe, but if we're just judging the Snyder cut of Justice League, I do think it's B. I think it's better than all of these, more cohesive. Again, it's a novelty though, and it feels unfair comparing it to the rest of these movies because none of these movies were ever going to be allowed to get a 4.5 hour cut. Hugest improvement was to Cyborg, who was basically a afterthought in the original Justice League cut. He's a real character, and I cared about him, and I cared about his life and his family and his choices, and I think they did a great job introducing him here. Ezra Miller's Flash, still don't really like it, even though they've taken a bit more seriously in this. I still don't enjoy Ezra Miller's version of Flash. I think that character is poorly cast, and we'll see what happens in the Flash film. Okay, so we're down to the final two. We've got The Suicide Squad by James Gunn, a film that has vision. Finally, a film that is given a vision to start and finish, does not appear to have any studio tampering, does not appear to have any studio directive, and does not appear to really be challenged by anyone. James Gunn, full creative control, it seems, to make this incredibly weird, outlandish film that had Starro the Conqueror as the main villain. Oh man, that made me so excited. I really like this movie. I think it is a really good movie, and I think it's by far, to me, the best movie that's been made in this series. I think there are bold choices made in this film. There are interesting characters to be brought in, and it's fun. It's fun, and I liked it. And it has Starro the Conqueror in it. If you were gonna get me into a DC movie, bring in Starro the Conqueror, bring in Polka Dot Man. I enjoyed this movie. Again, not one of the best superhero movies of all time, but it's the closest thing the DCU has gotten. So I will put it in the S tier of DCEU films. So now we move into the latest one, the one maybe a lot of you have clicked on this video for, Black Adam. Black Adam was a film that I personally was not that excited for. I love Black Adam as a villain, and I didn't think they would be making him a villain because of The Rock playing him, and also the fact that he is the main character of this film, and they do a better job than I thought. I will go into a few minor spoilers, so I guess if you haven't seen the movie, you could click off if you want to, but I'm not trying to spoil the whole plot. The way they use The Rock in this film works quite a few times. I made a joke with some friends after, and I said, when The Rock doesn't talk, he's wonderful as Black Adam. And, I don't mean that as an insult. What I mean is Black Adam's a character that is stern, that is fierce, that is really a lot of his emotion is shown on his face. He's someone who internalizes a lot of things and lets his anger out, which this movie does a pretty good job of capturing. So, in terms of capturing the character of Black Adam, I think they did a decent job. Now, there's always going to be the problem that The Rock is a gigantic superstar and always plays heroes. And Black Adam is basically turned into a hero in this movie, despite having some anti hero moments, and despite saying a million times that he's not a hero. He's a hero in this movie. And I'm not really looking forward to a DC franchise where Black Adam is one of the founding members of a new Justice League. I feel like that's going to happen, and it really shouldn't. Now, this movie is still a mess with random characters that don't need to be a part of this at all. It feels like a very early 2000s superhero movie in that sense, where, oh, we can't take superheroes seriously, or, oh, we don't know how to relate to these godlike beings. So let's bring in random family so that our audience can relate to them. No, nobody wants to see random family. Nobody wants to see little kid with a skateboard, and nobody wants to see lady digging for in the ruins. Like, give us people in conduct to get attached to, sure, but they shouldn't be as prominent in the film as Dr. Fate or something. Like, nobody cares. Nobody cares about the random people. We're here for Black Adam, and we're here for the JSA. And for me, actually, I thought Aldous Hodge was a really good Hawkman. Hawkman's always been one of my favorite characters that never gets really a true spotlight, and I thought they did a good job capturing the rage. Aldous Hodge does a really good job of capturing that rage and just unstoppable, never give up nature of Hawkman. Thought that was really good. So I'm looking forward to more there. Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate was one of the best casting choices they've really ever made in the DCU, a series full of questionable casting, and his performances are really good. Some cool action scenes. I think they had a really good Dr. Fate action sequence. All the Hawkman stuff is pretty good. I would like to see a bit more from him, of more variety of action scenes from him. So overall, I was pretty happy with what we got. But at the same time, we've seen this movie 100 times before. This is the most generic, safe superhero movie you could have made. But we all knew it was going to be pretty safe because it's The Rock, and because they're not going to take risks. They're not. At this point, DC's in the business of let's not make bad movies, which is kind of a sad place to be. Not let's go make the best superhero movie of all time. Not saying Marvel is in that category either. Marvel has been floundering a little bit with their films lately, but I think DC needs to try to do stuff like the Batman, which is make stuff that's different, try to bring audiences to your films in a different way, because as most of us DC fans find really frustrating, our characters were created first and given life first, and for many of us comic book fans and even kids like who are my age, who grew up with these animated shows in the 90s and early 2000s, Justice League, DC characters, they were always at the forefront. These characters were always the most important. And with the MCU, which has been wonderful, and I am a Marvel fan as well, so I've loved it every second of it. But for the DC fans, these characters that we love are now can look, a lot of Marvel fans look on them as, oh, they're X version of our Marvel character, when these characters were created first, and Marvel a lot of times copied those same power sets. You got to do something to make your films different, because if you make the same general superhero movies that Marvel's making, most people are just going to see it as the second rate Marvel. So we got to do something different. But anyway, enough with that rant. Black Adam, where do I rank it? I'd put it in C. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than Harley Quinn, but it is the most basic movie you could have ever made with Black Adam. And that's my rankings for the DCEU. Thank you so much for watching. Again, like I said, later this week, I will have a rankings of the entire Halloween franchise with Halloween Ends. I know it's a little late after the Halloween Ends came out, but I've enjoyed rewatching a lot of these movies in the series and watching some of them for the first time. So I want to talk about those here coming up. I also have a horror movies tier list with some of the most iconic horror movies of all time, giving you guys a list with about 50 horror movies, a tier list ranking of all those. So stay tuned for all of that. And if you haven't checked out Star Wars Lads, that's where I am. When you're wondering where I am on YouTube here, that's where I am usually doing work for Star Wars Lads. So if I get busy over there, this channel unfortunately gets sidelined. But I do, as I say every time, I know, but I do really want to make this channel bigger here in the coming months, because I love talking about some other things that aren't Star Wars, even though Star Wars is my favorite movie series and franchise of all time. With DC coming right after that, I really want to talk more about all this stuff over here. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.